if I say the word creatine, I know exactly where your mind goes.
Oh, yeah.
You're almost certainly picturing a gym. You're picturing this massive plastic tub of powder, maybe a shaker bottle.
And someone trying to add 10 pounds to their bench press.
Exactly. It is arguably the most famous, most,
Right.
ubiquitous supplement in the history of sports nutrition.
It's the undisputed heavyweight champion of muscle physiology. I mean, there's basically no debate left on whether it works for your biceps.
But today, we are not talking about biceps. We aren't talking about personal records or sprint times. We're talking about the brain. And specifically, we are looking at a really provocative paper from 2026 by Candow and his colleagues that suggests everything we thought we knew about this molecule might be, well, not wrong, but misapplied.
The paper is titled, Creatine Supplementation and the Brain. Have we put the cart before the horse? And that title is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
It really is.
It's essentially a polite academic accusation.
It implies we've been doing it backwards.
Exactly. For decades, we've operated on this lazy assumption that if you drink creatine, it does the same thing to your brain that it does to your quads.
Right.
But this paper argues that the biology is just fundamentally radically different. We've been recommending the cart, the supplement, before we actually understood the horse.
Which is the brain's unique and kind of stubborn rules of engagement.
Right.
So the mission for this deep dive is to figure out if we can actually manually override the brain's energy management system. And, if we can, why does the brain seem to fight us so hard when we try?
It's a battle against bioenergetics, and it turns out the brain is not a willing participant.
Okay, so I want to start with the paradox.
Yeah.
Because on paper, if you just look at a biology textbook, the brain looks like it should be the absolute best customer for creatine.
It really should.
We always hear that stat. The brain is this tiny organ, maybe 2% of your body weight?
But it burns through 20% of your resting energy. It is a metabolic furnace.
Right. And we know what creatine does. It recycles ATP. It's a battery charger. So theoretically, the brain should be just screaming for this stuff.
It should be. And to really get this, you have to understand what creatine actually does at the cellular level. It's not a fuel like sugar or fat.
It's a buffer.
It's a buffer. When a cell works hard, a muscle cell contracting, a neuron firing, it burns ATP. That ATP turns into ADP. It loses a phosphate. It becomes a dead battery.
And creatine is the jumper cables.
Precisely. Phosphocreatine donates its phosphate group to turn that dead ADP back into live ATP. It happens in milliseconds. It is the rapid response energy system.
So given that neurons are firing constantly and thinking is so energetically expensive, you'd think the brain would be hoarding creatine like gold.
You would think, but this is where we hit the wall, or literally a barrier. The paper describes the brain not as a sponge like muscle, but as a fortress.
Blood-brain barrier.
This is the BBB, and this is the fundamental disconnect between, gym bro science and neuroscience. Muscle tissue is promiscuous. It loves creatine. It has these transporters, specifically one called SLC6A8. Think of them as just open doors.
So if you drink a creatine shake,
it floods your blood, hits those doors, and the muscle just sucks it all up.
So muscle is easy to saturate.
Very easy. A standard 5-gram scoop a day, and within a few weeks, your muscles are completely topped off.
But the brain leaves you standing outside the club.
The brain is incredibly exclusive. It protects its homeostasis aggressively. And here's the key biological insight from the paper. The brain synthesizes its own creatine.
It's endogenous.
It makes what it needs right there in the tissue.
It's a survival mechanism, right? It doesn't want to rely on whether or not you successfully hunted a mammoth today.
Exactly. It's self-reliant. And because it makes its own, it doesn't leave the back door open for creatine floating around in the blood.
So it restricts it.
It actively restricts it. The paper highlights a crucial detail about those SLC6A8 transporters we mentioned. The cells that line the blood-brain barrier and the cells that support your neurons, called astrocytes, they don't really have those transporters, or they have very, very few of them.
So you drink the shake, it goes into your gut, into your blood, it floods your muscles, but when it gets to the brain,
the drawbridge is up.
The drawbridge is up.
And there are archers on the wall. The brain essentially says, I have my own supply, thank you very much.
Which brings us right back to that cart before the horse argument. The authors are saying, hey, we've been running all these studies giving people 5 grams of creatine and checking if they got smarter.
And when the results came back mixed or, negligible, people said, oh, creatine doesn't work for cognition.
But they were just knocking.
They weren't knocking hard enough. This paper argues, no, you just didn't knock hard enough to get in. You were using a muscle protocol for a neural problem.
So what does it take to breach the fortress? If 5 grams is a polite knock, what's the battering ram?
The cost of admission is way, way higher than we thought. The paper reviews all the data and suggests that to get any significant uptake in the brain, you need overwhelming force.
What are we talking about?
We are talking about doses like 20 grams a day.
20 grams. That is a massive amount of powder. That's 4 heaping scoops.
It is a huge physiological load, and you might need to do that for weeks or even months to see an effect. The paper suggests the brain is so resistant that you essentially have to just flood the system to force even a small percentage across that barrier.
I can hear people doing the mental math on the cost of their supplements right now.
Mm.
But also, my stomach hurts just thinking about 20 grams.
And that is a real limiting factor, which we can get to later. But the point is, biologically, the brain is a vault. You can force more fuel into it, but you have to abandon the idea that it's just like filling up a gas tank.
Okay, so step 1 is realizing getting it in is hard. But let's assume we do. Let's say we take the 20 grams, we suffer through the bloating, and we actually get the creatine levels up in the brain. Here is where the paper gets really interesting to me. It suggests that even if you get it in, it might not make you any smarter.
Right. This is the stress hypothesis. And honestly, this is the most intellectually satisfying part of the argument for me.
Because usually we think of supplements, especially nootropics, as boosters. Like, if I'm smart, this will make me smarter. Linear gains.
And the evidence suggests that is completely wrong for the brain. The authors point out that in a healthy, well-rested, unstressed brain, creatine supplementation often shows a ceiling effect.
Explain that.
Think of your brain's energy like a cup. If you're sleeping 8 hours, eating well, you're young and healthy, your cup is already full. Your brain is already making all the creatine it needs to handle its daily load. Throwing more creatine at it is like pouring water into a full cup. It just spills over.
It does make the fire burn hotter.
Oh.
So if I'm sitting on the couch on a Sunday, fully rested, feeling good, taking creatine for my brain is basically just creating expensive urine.
For the brain, potentially yes, but the dynamic flips completely when you introduce metabolic stress.
Okay.
The paper argues that creatine isn't a fuel for the good times. It is a crisis manager.
A crisis management.
It becomes relevant when the system is under attack.
This is a huge shift in mindset. It's not a vitamin, it's insurance.
Exactly. It's not a turbocharger, it's a backup generator.
Yeah.
You don't need a backup generator when the power grid is working perfectly. You need it during a blackout.
So what counts as a blackout for the brain? What triggers this crisis mode?
Anything that compromises bioenergetics. The paper lists the big ones. Sleep deprivation.
Of course.
Hypoxia, lack of oxygen. Severe mental fatigue from, intense cognitive work. And then pathology, things like Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injury, or depression.
I want to drill down into these because this is the practical application.
Yep.
But before we do, I want to take a slight detour into the how.
The methods.
The paper spends a lot of time discussing how we know any of this.
Yeah.
And it turns out measuring chemicals in a living human brain is incredibly difficult.
It is. And this is the methodological warning the cart again. The authors argue that our ruler for measuring this stuff has been, broken for a long time.
We can't just cut the brain open and check.
Not if you want the volunteer to come back for the follow-up study. No. So we use something called magnetic resonance spectroscopy, or MRS.
Most people know MRI. How is MRS different?
So an MRI takes a picture of the anatomy. It uses water molecules to show you the shape of the brain, the structures.
Okay.
MRS is more like listening to the brain. It listens for the chemical chords or the resonance frequencies of specific molecules. It tries to hear the signal of creatine amidst all the noise of everything else.
That sounds poetic, but the paper implies it's actually a nightmare.
It's messy. First of all, distinguishing between free creatine and phosphocreatine, the charged version, is chemically very, very hard. Their signals look almost identical.
So you can't tell them apart?
Not easily. So researchers often just blur them together into a total creatine signal, which, it loses nuance. But the bigger issue is what they call the voxel problem.
The voxel is the little box they draw on the screen to measure.
Right. It's a 3D pixel. But think about the brain. It's a mix of gray matter, the processing centers, and white matter, the wiring.
And they have different concentrations.
Gray matter has much higher creatine concentrations.
I see where this is going.
If you place that voxel box slightly differently on Tuesday than you did on Monday, or if the patient tilts their head just 2 millimeters and you capture more white matter, your data is ruined.
You think the levels change, but you just moved the box.
You're just measuring a different tissue type. And then there's the software. The paper mentions that different software packages analyzing the exact same raw data can give results that vary by 20%.
Wow. So if a study says creatine improved brain energy by 10%, but the error margin of the software is 20%?
You have a meaningless study, and that's why we have to be so skeptical of older research that claimed no effect. They might have just missed it in the noise.
So the authors are saying, before we make these broad claims, we need to standardize how we hold the ruler.
Exactly.
Okay, that's the technical caution. But let's get to the so what. Because despite the measurement issues, the paper highlights some really compelling data where they did use high doses and they did see results.
Yes.
Let's talk about the specific scenarios where this crisis manager actually saves the day.
The biggest one, and arguably the most important for society, is Alzheimer's disease.
They mention a specific trial here, the CABA trial.
Yes. This is fascinating because it connects bioenergetics directly to neurodegeneration. We used to think of Alzheimer's just as, plaques and tangle structural damage.
Right.
But there's a growing theory that before the memory loss sets in, there is an energy crisis.
The mitochondria and the neurons start failing.
Exactly. They call it hypometabolism. The lights start flickering before they go out. So the logic of the CABA trial was, can we patch the grid?
Can we force enough energy into the system to keep the lights on?
And they did not mess around with the dosing. No. They used that high dose we talked about, 20 grams a day. They also added something else, ASA, which is an anti-inflammatory. But the creatine is the key part here. They ran this for 8 weeks.
And did it breach the fortress?
It did. They used MRS very carefully and saw an 11% increase in brain creatine. But more importantly, the patients improved. They saw significant gains in fluid cognition and memory compared to the placebo group.
That is wild. I mean, we have billions of dollars being poured into drug research for Alzheimer's, often with very little to show for it. And here is a 20-gram dose of a cheap, safe powder moving the needle.
And we have to be careful. It's a pilot trial. It's not a cure. But it suggests that creatine could be a bioenergetic patch. It doesn't fix the underlying disease, but it gives the neurons enough energy to keep functioning despite the damage.
It buys time.
It buys time.
Buying time is a great transition to the next implication, which applies to basically everyone listening. Sleep.
This is where the crisis manager theory really shines. If you want to induce metabolic stress in a healthy person, just stop them from sleeping.
I am familiar with the feeling.
There was a study discussed where they took healthy adults and sleep-deprived them for 24 hours. But before the all-nighter, they gave them a massive single dose of creatine.
How massive?
About 0.35 grams per kilogram of body weight. For a normal person, that's like 30 grams.
30 grams. Wow.
It's huge. But look at the result. Usually when you don't sleep, the pH level in your brain drops. Your brain literally becomes more acidic.
And as pH drops, cognition crashes.
You get foggy, your reaction times slow down, all of that.
And the creatine group.
Their brain pH remains stable, and their cognitive function held up. They didn't experience the same crash.
So it's not replacing sleep. It's not fixing the damage?
No, absolutely not. It's armor. It buffers the metabolic cost of being awake. It allows the brain to run on fumes for longer without stalling out.
It's the difference between your car dying immediately when the gas light comes on.
And having a reserve tank that gets you another 50 miles.
Yes. I feel like this changes how people should think about using it. Instead of taking 5 grams every morning like a multivitamin, maybe take a high dose only when you know you're walking into a firestorm.
That's exactly what the conditional hypothesis suggests. It's a tactical supplement.
What about mental health? The paper touches on depression. How does that fit into this energy story?
It fits perfectly if you view depression, or at least some forms of it, as a bioenergetic failure.
Okay.
There's data showing that in some forms of depression, particularly types that don't respond to SSRIs, brain phosphocreatine levels are chronically low. The neurons are they're tired.
They lack the energy.
They lack the energy to maintain positive affect and plasticity.
And again, I'm guessing dose matters here.
Massively. They mention a study comparing 2 grams, 4 grams, and 10 grams a day. The 2 grams did nothing. The 10-gram dose was the one that really moved the needle on brain phosphocreatine.
So for mental health, we've been underdosing.
We've been treating the brain like a bicep, and it needs more support than that.
This paints a pretty compelling picture. But we promise to be intellectually honest. We have to address the limitations. Where could this all go wrong?
The biggest limitation is the non-responder reality. This paper admits that even with these high doses, not everyone's brain takes up the creatine. There's massive individual variability.
Why? Is it genetic?
We don't really know. It could be the density of those transporters. Maybe you're just born with fewer of them. It could be your baseline diet. We know vegetarians usually respond better because their baseline creatine is lower.
Right.
But some brains just seem to keep the gates locked no matter how much you take.
And then there's the dosing black box.
Mm.
We keep saying 20 grams seems to work, but is that sustainable?
That's the danger zone. I mean, 20 grams a day is a heavy load for the gut. Diarrhea, bloating, cramping, it's not fun.
But more importantly, we don't know the long-term feedback loop. If you flood the brain with external creatine for a year, does the brain stop making its own?
Does it downregulate its own synthesis?
Yeah.
It might. And then if you stop taking the supplement, do you crash? We just don't have that data yet. The cart is still before the horse.
And we have to reiterate the ceiling effect. I feel like this is important so people don't run out and buy a tub expecting to become Einstein.
If you are healthy, sleeping 8 hours, eating well, and not under extreme stress, this paper suggests this might do absolutely nothing for you. It is a tool for deficits, not necessarily a tool for superabundance.
Which brings us to the final, open intellectual question. And this is the one that's been bugging me since I read the paper.
I think I know where you're going with this.
If creatine is so protective, if it protects against TBI, helps with oxygen deprivation, acts as a backup generator, why on earth did evolution design the brain to be so bad at absorbing it?
That is the evolutionary puzzle. Why lock the gate if the treasure is so valuable?
Exactly. If it's so good, why is the brain a fortress against it?
Well, there are two ways to look at this. One is the self-reliance theory. Endogenous synthesis, making it yourself, was safer and more reliable than counting on finding a mammoth to eat. So the brain became self-reliant and closed the borders to the blood supply to maintain strict control.
Control over its homeostasis.
Right. But there is a darker possibility.
Go on.
The darker possibility is that there's a downside to supercharging the brain that we just haven't found yet. Maybe running the brain at a higher bioenergetic state has some long-term cost. Maybe it produces more waste products. We don't see it in the data yet, but nature usually doesn't create barriers without a reason.
Or the fortress is simply a design flaw in the modern world. Maybe we were never meant to live into our 80s or stay awake for 24 hours staring at screens.
That's my preferred take. The brain evolved for a world of scarcity and natural rhythms. We live in a world of abundance and chronic artificial stress.
Yeah.
And in that modern context, manually overriding the system, forcing the gate open, might be exactly what we need to survive our own lifestyles.
So let's summarize the big takeaway for the listener today.
The takeaway is that the brain is not a bicep. If you want to use creatine for cognition, you have to respect the biology. It likely requires higher doses, upwards of 10 to 20 grams, to breach the blood-brain barrier.
And most importantly,
It is a context-dependent molecule.
it's not a magic pill for a sunny day.
No. But the next time you are facing an all-nighter, or you're recovering from a concussion, or you're dealing with the heavy fog of depression, that is the moment this molecule becomes interesting. That is when the backup generator matters.
And that invites us to look at all supplements, not through marketing hype, but through mechanism. Don't just ask, does it work?
Ask, under what conditions does the biology allow it to work? Context is everything.
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll catch you on the next one.